Ugh. Man, I'm feeling so drabby today. I know. Your breath to mine. Woo!
Oh
That
no!
felt good.
And with that, welcome to this week's episode of the 800s. I am your co-host Alex, and you just heard from my now full of breath co-host Adam. And as always, shout out and thank you to Alan behind the scenes for making it happen.
Yeah.
All right, with that, why don't we just dive straight into the plugs?
Sure thing. If you joined us before we became colorful, you were listening to some music. That music was Fearless First. And that's by Incompetech. Incompetech does a whole bunch of cool scores and other music. You should totally check them out. If you'd like to, go over to incompetech.filmmusic.io. Check them out today. Otherwise, you should check out our YouTube channel. We are the DM's Table on YouTube. The link is below the video here. There is where we post all of our videos, including these lovely book chats, as well as some podcasts and some book reviews and some other stuff like that. So check it out today. Also, we have Patreon. We're the DM's Table on Patreon. That's how we keep the lights on. So if you feel like being generous, head over to Patreon today. That link is also below the video. And if you like audiobooks, like I do, you should check out Audible. Audible is Amazon's audiobook platform, and they give away 3 free books for new subscribers. If you'd like to try it out today, go over to dmstable.com/audible and check it out. Plus, we have an Etsy page, dmstable.com/Etsy. There you can find things of nerd culture 3D printed. It's super duper cool. I have a Tetris set. You should buy one too. And I think that's it for plugs.
Oh, some solid plugs there. So this week on the 800s, we will be discussing Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson, set within Sanderson's ever-expanding Cosmere of worlds. Idris and Hallandren are on the brink of war yet again. The Idrians have sent their youngest princess, Ciri, to wed the God King, ruler of Hallandren, their pantheon of gods, and the immeasurably colorful city of Tutelar. Following in hopes of rescuing her is Ciri's sister, Vivienne. Each in their own way hopes to stem the tides of war, one from the God King's court, the other from the city slums. But will their efforts be enough to thwart those who threaten the tenuous peace? Or will their efforts be for naught, allowing the floodgates of war to break? Hold your breath.
That was a funny double meaning at the end there.
Yeah, well, it may or may not have been inspired last minute by your opener.
Oh, good. If this is your guys' first time joining us, let me give you a rundown of how this show operates. Essentially, we are a topic/question-based show. We're going to be discussing between ourselves a topic or question prompted by either Alex or myself or chat. While we're doing that, feel free to type up your own opinion on the topic or question at hand. And if you have something to say, we'll give you a nice shout out and talk about what you said. So at any time that you're feeling inspired, feel free to throw a comment or question in chat, and we'll bring it up and talk about it.
And as usual, this is a show geared towards adults as we cover adult themes and topics. And while we try not to swear too much, it does happen from time to time. So bring kids around at your own discretion. Also, over at DM's Table, we're trying to create a community that is fun and supportive and allows people to embrace their interests, whatever they may be, without any fear of judgment or ridicule. So please, in some, be nice or fuck off. Okay.
With that, let's get things rolling. Alex and chat, what were your first impressions of Warbreaker?
Honestly, this one for like even for a Brandon Sanderson book, the first impressions were like it felt like it was moving really slow, like from the very beginning, and like it helps that Brandon Sanderson kind of gets a little bit of leeway from me just because I trust him as an author enough to follow through on stuff and that there's going to be some sort of payoff on the back end of it. Um, but if this were an author that I didn't know, I would have had trouble getting through like the first quarter of this book because it felt a little slow. There's some cool stuff, and as always, he does a good job of answering questions in such a way that you get an answer, but you also have two more questions for every answer that you get. So it is compelling in that regard, in particular with the magic system, which I think that was the most captivating thing for me up front. Which is not too untypical, like atypical for a Brandon Sanderson novel. So yeah, he caught me with the first impressions. He caught me with the magic system, but man, was it slow to begin.
Yeah, this book is interesting in length of intro and overall length, being that it feels like the intro is just as long as, say, The Way of Kings, but it's a much shorter book overall.
Yeah.
I personally had a big problem with the plot setup at the beginning, with how the king at the last minute decided to send his other daughter to marry the God King of Halandrin. Where that felt like a illogical switcheroo at the very last minute and was never really fully explained. So it is definitely one of the harder books to kind of get sucked into, I think, in terms of Brando Sando novels. I will say, though, that his typical fashion of showing a non-main character at the beginning doing something super duper awesome is always a very catchy way of grabbing the reader's attention. And I think that part is as true as ever with this book. It's just the main story seemed kind of offbeat for me.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on that point. Like, it is it's always something you look forward to because like, and again, I think he gets credit because he's done it before, and we know there's going to be a payoff for it. Where yeah, it's really cool, but like you can put something really cool at the beginning, and if there's no payoff to it later or a callback or something, then it's just dumb. Why was it there? But as a first with Brandon Sanderson, you can take it as a positive because you can almost completely bank on it coming through later and actually being fulfilling, Yeah. So you can just enjoy it and not be skeptical of like, well, where does this come in, or will this come into play at any point? Because it will. It's just a matter of when and how.
Yeah.
I think V.S. Drake has a good point. This did feel a lot more similar to Elantris, where both of them had that kind of slowish start to it, and they were shorter compared to the Way of like the Stormlight Archives books. So your long beginnings with a much shorter resolution makes it feel like a tougher read up front. I agree with V.S. Drake. Yeah, definitely enjoy the magic system, and it's not a bad book. It's just up front, it's a little bit of a slog. Why don't we bring that into discussion, since it make it an actual discussion, since V.S. Drake brought it up and you brought it up in yours as well, is what about can you elaborate a bit more on your thoughts about the decision to send Ciri over Viviana?
Yeah, so in the book, the king says he can't bring himself to sacrifice Vivenna to Halandrin and decides to send Ciri instead. And to me, that felt kind of lacking. Because why would he be okay with sacrificing his younger daughter to what would become much worse of a fate, considering she was untrained, underage, very underprepared for such a transition? Why would he be more comfortable with that and less comfortable with sending the daughter that he had been preparing his entire life to lose in such a way? It just, to me, like, I understand the emotional prompt that was given, but it didn't logically make sense to me.
See, and this is where I disagree with you on that you mentioned earlier that you said it wasn't really resolved, but it kind of was, in that the idea seemed to have been, there was a partially emotional one where, yeah, they definitely set it up where it's a society where your oldest is the most valuable to you typically, but they do explain down the road that the king believes that war is inevitable, and sending Ciri was a stall tactic. It was not ever meant to be. She was a sacrificial lamb to buy him and his kingdom more time to figure out what the fuck to do. And yes, it is not the most logical of decisions, but like there is a tenuous logic to it. I do think it was dumb because, like you said, if you send somebody who's prepared, they might actually be able to do something about it. But I think Brandon Sanderson did kind of sweep under the rug a bit, but he did bring it up specifically that the king was a believer that the war was going to happen, and it came out or manifested in Vivienna's actions and her decision early on to work with why am I blanking on his name? The mercenary dude starts with a D.
Denth.
Denth. Yeah, to work with Denth in the way that she did is because she had the same mentality as her father, is that war is inevitable, so if we're going to do this, we're going to try and, rather than try and make war not happen, we're going to try and cripple the enemy. So I think that's where the logic kind of fits in a little bit, but it was definitely one of Brandon Sanderson's weaker decisions in the book, for sure, to just have it happen without any sort of background up front and have it kind of just swept under the rug later.
Yeah. Fierce Drake pitches, she was useless and he loved Vivenna more. That definitely seemed to be the case.
Mm-hmm.
Although I personally don't understand how that could be the case. But yeah, I think that is something that was supposed to be apparent in the book. There's more scientific pseudoscience based on how Zyle explained investiture in Stormlight Archives.
I mean, it kind of makes sense in if you are going to go that scientific route for this magic system anyway. Considering that this is all based off of, it's a magic system that enhances the senses, is what it does. And the ability to manipulate what is essentially the soul or breath. I guess the least scientific part of it is obviously the awakening stuff. But, you know, like most of the powers are not necessarily as magical as, say, something like Mistborn or Stormlight Archives. It is the ability to see the full spectrum of color and tell the difference between them, to hear the full spectrum of color, to have an immune system, that is boosted, peak physical form, lack of aging. And the idea is that the soul lends these things their ability to it's the soul lends the body's ability to interact with the world, I guess.
Yeah. I feel like that's the difference between, say, Stormlight and Breath. Is Stormlight is meant to be like an external augmentation, where Breath is supposed to be an internal augmentation.
Yeah, agreed. Which, if you look at, like, say, compared to the Mistborn series, it is a combination of essentially both of those things, depending on what you're doing. And this dichotomy and balance between internal and external is seen throughout the Cosmere. So it kind of makes sense that this would follow as one that focuses on, something that is essentially, like you said, Adam, exact opposite of Stormlight Archives.
Yeah. I think V. Drake does have a point about Xyle. Semi spoiler for those of you who don't know, Xyle is Vasher. Xyle being the Stormlight Archive character, Vasher being the Warbreaker character. Xyle is definitely a different person on Roshar than in Warbreaker. And I think you see that in a multitude of ways. But I think the biggest is in Stormlight Archive / Roshar. He's essentially done. He's not participating anymore. He's just helping people do what they need to do. He's not doing anything personally. And in Warbreaker, he's an active participant in the conflict.
Yeah, and you can tell it's a different stage in his life, considering, like, it feels like towards the end we get to see something of, like, Xyle / Vasher's origin story, essentially. I mean,
yeah.
If you can say, like, somebody's origin story, doesn't include, like, their first couple 100 years of existence.
What else did you think about the magic system, though?
Initially, I thought it was interesting. But I thought it was going to be pretty limited as to what it could do. Because I initially thought it was specifically just the senses, and, like, yeah, it's augmenting the senses, and yeah, you become immune to disease and stuff. And awakening seemed too limited for what I'm used to out of Brandon Sanderson. But as usual, he does a good job in the end of bringing it together and showing, like, what the real applications of these things can be through the use of them, not necessarily the discussion of them. I mean, there's a little bit of that when Vasher is teaching Viviana.
Yeah.
But honestly, of all the magic systems, this one, while it wasn't the most intriguing from an action standpoint for most of the book, I think it is one of the ones I would most want to try personally. If it, if minus the, I would be sucking somebody's soul out, but but like when he's describing colors and stuff, like the shift in colors, like in a painting that's entirely red, but if you have like a certain level of awakening, then you can see an entire picture out of it. In a world that is, or at least a city that is so dedicated to art, I would have to imagine it would be one of the most beautiful things to behold. And so I thought, like, here's a power that I could like engage with that would be, it wouldn't be feel compelled to be like used or explored through battle of any kind, is I could explore it without doing any of that shit.
What I found most interesting about Warbreaker versus other Cosmere magic systems is this is the one where it doesn't matter who you are, you can do it. And not only that, but you're born with an extremely small percentage of already doing it. You're one breath. And you can step down from there in terms of magic. So it's kind of what I'd be curious about is if a drab goes to another planet, would they still be a drab? Would they be less than everybody else on that planet in terms of senses? Or is that the natural state of everybody else on all other planets?
You bring up an interesting point, and I had a similar thought early on about how, like, oh, everybody's got a little magic in them.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting thought experiment, and I want, as much as I'd love to delve like highly deep into it, I'm trying to. I would like to try and keep this on this book and not exploring the entirety of the Cosmere, like for anybody who comes into this. But yeah, no, if I had to guess though, I think their soulless state would be like, if breath is the soul, I think it would be closer to like, I think it would be less than. Maybe elsewhere, because like I don't think other places don't have souls. They just don't have the ability to manipulate them.
Yeah, I think.
But I could think about that for hours on end because it becomes kind of a loop.
I think, in my opinion, I think it's only in Warbreaker can you manipulate your breath, but an inherent breath exists in everyone, is what I think. So you would be less if you go to another planet.
Yeah, that's kind of my thought as well. I assume everywhere else has souls except maybe the ones on Mistborn who were like basically augmented to be literally less than. But anyways, let's swing back into Warbreaker, and let's talk about our heroines, or our main character, our two female leads here. What did you think about the characters Ciri and Viviana, like individually and as like sisters?
Yeah. So here's something interesting that is worth pointing out. So there are two main narrators for Warbreaker in terms of audiobooks, and they both take very different approaches on how to voice each character in the book. And this book is a book where it's very apparent that a narrator's take on a character affects your own personal take on that character, because I've listened to both and it gives you a different kind of feel for each character. Just kind of a side note for takes on characters here, but um, for me, I found Vivenna and Ciri to be very naive and childish at the start. I think it was intentional because of their royal upbringing and seclusion from normal society. I think that's one area where Brando Sando wanted them to grow and show a ton of growth is in their maturity towards society. But I was surprised at the naivete that they started out with. Specifically, like Vivenna's jaded look on those who use breath and expectation of how everybody from her homeland would feel in Halandran society. It felt very childish and unrealistic that she would actually expect that to be how they felt. Obviously, that's something she grows out of as she experiences Halandra and is taken advantage of and realizes that she's been taken advantage of and all the stuff that Vivenna goes through. So yeah, I think starting out they were weak, and Brando Sando kind of brought them up to a more realistic character as the story progressed.
Well, I agree in the aspect that they were very naive coming in. I don't think it is unrealistic given the insights we get into how the princesses were treated in their homeland, especially. But you have to look at it through the eyes of Ciri, ironically, to get a feel for why Vivenna was so naive in the way that she believed other people would think the way that she does. Is they are essentially kept so isolated that all they got was one viewpoint, essentially. And the reason why Ciri seems to accept these other viewpoints faster is because she was the rebel. Vivenna was the consummate, follower of orders. And it doesn't surprise me that she went in believing what she was told to believe, and that's just the way the world was. It seems to be that, like, the whole idea is her father has this set of rules and viewpoints on the world, and he tried everything he could to impose that on his daughters. One accepted it, the other didn't. And so, like, I don't think it was unrealistic. Was it childish? Absolutely. But I think we're learning a lot more about the king being childish as well. But honestly, that was actually one of the kind of fun things for me, though, was how childish they were. Is because as sisters, when they they seemed realistic in that respect. Like, if you grew up with siblings, the kind of like squabbling and like, I'm jealous of this person's aspects, I'm jealous of that person's aspects, but you never tell each other any of it. It's kind of normal. And it just comes out as like hostility. Also, welcome Stormreed, thanks for coming in. Stormreed does bring up a good point. What do you think about what they said about the older sister seemingly accepting holding breath very easy?
I don't feel like she did accept it that easily. When she was gifted the breaths from the spy guy who was being tortured and was essentially killed by Denth and his cronies unknowingly. She was very against holding it for a long time and didn't want to use it. And even when she did start using it, it took a life or death incident for her to actually fully grasp that it's acceptable for her to use the breath that she was gifted. So I kind of disagree with Storm on her accepting the breath easily.
I would tend to agree with you, Adam. I don't think she accepted it easily. It seems like she does in a way, I guess, because she gets them so early on and she's fascinated by it. But I think being fascinated by it is very different from accepting it, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's just kind of like a little disconnect there. V.S. Drake does bring up another good point that I very specifically wanted to discuss as well is how these characters felt a little underdeveloped despite being main characters. They felt in a lot of ways, aside from like a scene or two each, like they were more vehicles for plot than they were characters. You know, or it was more a way to move through the world, and it didn't feel like it felt like all the development was kind of shoved in at the end, I guess. And it felt secondary, which felt a little weird to me personally.
I would agree with you for Ciri, but not Vivina. I think Vivina was well fleshed in terms of her ignorance and reluctance to accept the status quo, and then her shift towards her time with Vasher and actually doing good. I think she existed more as her own character that grew and learned about the bigotry that she was holding on to and had to let go.
Yeah, I don't think she was without it entirely, and I do absolutely agree that Vivenna got far more than Ciri did as far as development. It just hers felt a little hasty in the grand scheme of things. Maybe it's just because we're used to the way Brandon Sanderson normally does it, piece by piece, like throughout an entire novel, and hers came from basically a solitary chapter, the one where she was on the streets and she that's where the change really comes from. So, which, upon further thought, I think you're right. It does provide, it is realistic in the way that she does change, and the way her viewpoints shift as she interacts with Vasher. So yeah, I probably didn't give her or Sanderson enough credit for her changes and her development, but it was less than I'm used to from Brandon Sanderson's main characters. And yeah. It felt a little rushed in a way, but in a way that isn't like unsatisfying. It's just different from what we're used to, I guess.
Yeah. Well, who was your favorite character in terms of depth and just personal favorite?
Oh, Light Song. By far, Light Song. I just loved him end to end. He was who he was, but what he was just trying to figure shit out, and he was humorous, intelligent. He seems to never be thinking, but he always is, and in ways that are out of the box, which is fun. And he's like that throughout the entirety of the book. He moves plot along. He introduces characters by just being himself. He's somebody that people gravitate towards, but it never feels unearned because he's the type of character that I probably would gravitate towards, like in real life, if I were one of the gods, I suppose. um, uh, and the way that, and honestly, it was legitimately heartbreaking when he died too, which, like, I think when a character dies and you actually feel heartbroken, there's no way that there wasn't significant development or attachment to that character. And yeah, he was my favorite part of the entire book, honestly. How about you?
Yeah.
Or
yeah, I gotta say, Light Song is definitely, I personally think, one of the best written characters of Brando Sando, just because he's super relatable in a what would I do if I won the lottery type of way.
Yeah, right? Which he basically did.
Yeah. Where he's essentially faking it every day of his life, and it comes across as so genuine. But personally, my favorite character is kind of not a character. It would be Nightblood, the sword.
Fair enough.
Just because it's such an interesting take on what would a character be like who was created, an AI essentially, of a magical system.
What if you gave sentience to an inanimate object?
Yeah.
And the main reasons I didn't mention Vasher or the sword were they came into it so late that I'd be more likely to just to like them more if they are developed more in the next book or whatever. But what you mentioned about what little we do get from, you just said it, the sword's name.
Nightblood.
Yeah, Nightblood. What we do get from Nightblood is, like you said, fascinating. Like little things like it happened yesterday. That was like 300 years ago. He doesn't know the concept of time. That little interaction was pretty, like, is really cool to think about. But as a character, like, I guess I gravitate towards those that have a lot of development and are more fully fleshed out than Vasher or Nightblood got to be. I'm hoping that if there is another book to follow, that we get to see more of them, because of the characters that are left, they're my favorites.
Yeah. Storm mentioned something earlier I wanted to circle back to, but we kind of kept going in a trend. Where was it? Siri seemed to take what she is told as the truth without question. Why doesn't she tell the king what the priests were telling her? That's kind of a interesting topic in and of its own, is Siri's relationships between the king, I can't remember the Palandran servant name, but
Bluefingers.
Bluefingers, yeah.
Yeah, because he's staying with blue ink.
Yeah. And the head priest. So I guess to sum it up, what do you think of Siri's interaction between the three powerful men surrounding her?
I think it fits the theme that Brandon Sanderson set up for the two sisters, of just, like, she was more open to new stuff, but growing up where she did, she had her preconceived notions, and her preconceived notion is that people of the Halandran religion were evil, and she had more in common with Bluefingers because he too was raised to not give a shit about color um, and ostentation. You know, like they followed the same god, so like it makes sense that she would gravitate towards him, and she had enough of a um, independent streak to actually talk with the God King eventually. Uh, it did seem a little out of character for her to not mention certain things to him once she like because she clearly like once she got to know him, trusted him pretty early on, uh, him being the God King. But why she didn't bring up certain details didn't make sense to me either, I guess. Like why she didn't bring up uh there was a very specific thing that the priest said, or no, not that the priest said, but she brings up the fact that she thinks that the priest acts out of holy duty, not out of greed. And she thinks that for herself, but fails to mention it and continues to try to subvert them, which didn't make a lot of sense to me. But
Yeah.
other than that, most of the rest of it made sense as far as her interactions with the other characters.
Yeah, I think her reluctance to talk to the king is actually dead on character-wise, just because she is supposed to be an immature youth, and I think her personal view of the king was that she was better than him and that she knew what to do and he would not have no opinion on what to do. And
Good point.
yeah, and I think the best way that that's shown is the fact that she doesn't really discuss the specifics of what she's finding out from the head priest and Bluefingers. She just tells him, "This is what we're going to do because of what I know about the X, Y, and Z," even though there's A through W that she didn't tell him.
Yeah, VS Drake does make a good point that Brandon Sanderson did a decent job of giving legitimate reasons most of the time as to why something wouldn't be communicated. There's just enough doubt, subterfuge, and assumptions being made that make sense without feeling forced most of the time. Yeah, so I agree with you there, VS Drake. But
Yeah,
Storm
same.
Reed, well, I was going to ask Storm Reed if they wouldn't mind clarifying what they mean by being a little tired of Brandon Sanderson. I don't know if that is the writing style, or I know we recently talked about how when you read his books, sometimes you just need to, decompress a bit in between them. So, or if there's something entirely different going on in your mind, we'd love to hear what you have to say about that. But for now, why don't we talk about our antagonists, Denth and his crew?
Yeah. Specifically Denth or just antagonists in general?
Let's keep it with Denth and his crew specifically because I want to talk about the final villain later.
Okay. I gotta say, I didn't see the double cross coming the first time I read Warbreaker, which granted was years upon years ago, but I I really liked it. Like, it was such a funny, like, lazy way of kidnapping someone to make them think you're working for them. And oh, hang on a second.
Oh, thank you. You got to it before I could, Adam.
Yeah.
We just had a little bot throw something in chat, got rid of it.
Yeah. But yeah, I really really enjoyed the double cross and the fact that Denth got away with it for so long and managed to perfectly play against Vivenna's innocence and naivete for so long. I feel like there should have been more about why he was doing it, but if ignoring the big why behind his actions, and if you just assume he's an agent of Halandrin, I really thought that they were pretty cool villains.
Yeah, I thought the same. That as well, both as villains and as allies, that they were. You have a charming, well-spoken leader that challenges the main character's ideas just enough to, dispel suspicion that they're being charmed in the first place, but also does a good job of manipulating in a realistic way, using tactics that are incredibly smart to basically help the captive, quote unquote, steer into their own skid. And so as a villain, the double cross, I had a notion at one point, but it wasn't because of Denth. It was because of the serial killer dude, the
Tongfa?
guy with the Tongfa. It was because of him. I was like, there's no way that he loses these animals like he's saying he is. Like he gave me serial killer vibes from the beginning, and I was just like, I think there's more going on here. I didn't necessarily clock Denth. In my head, I remember thinking it was the other two. Like those two were going to like be bought out from under Denth and Vivenna. So Denth himself was a perfect like turnaround. I especially love the line that he reveals. He's like, you know what the worst part about this is? I do so hate confirming stereotypes. Like, like that line was perfect. And I was just a little surprised that they jumped the gun the way that they did, though. She disappears for one night and they flip their shit.
That it's the gig's up.
Yeah. And one thing I don't like is they don't fully explain like why they killed the dude, like her friend, like Vivenna's friend.
Yeah.
From Idris. It's just like it was an accident, and they keep saying it wasn't meant to happen, but they don't ever fucking explain it. Like I know they tortured him
a little too long.
But like
Tongfa got his hands on him and oopsed it.
Yeah, it's just I don't know. That felt a little hand waved, I guess, and didn't care for that bit. But yeah, they Lenny'd him. By the way, Stormy, thank you for letting us know that it was a matter of like there's just been a lot of time spent on Brandon Sanderson's books, and we do fully understand that there are a lot to get through, and we appreciate you letting us know that it maybe we need to dial it back on the Brandon Sanderson books, for not just for our sake, but for the viewer's sake. Go for at least a little while.
Yeah, we're almost through all of them anyway.
Wrong, but okay. Seriously, though, thank you for letting us know. All right, since we covered Denth, then why don't we move on to the other antagonists?
Sure thing. So I felt that it was interesting timing for the Pankals people to decide to do their stuff. I mean, I guess it makes sense in the consideration that they're using the war as a convenient don't shoot me, shoot this other person.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, to me it felt like a lot was going on all of a sudden in the world that should have not all waited for the same exact moment. But considering that it did, um, I really liked the parallel between Denth and crew double crossing and the Pankal workers double crossing Siri.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was a pretty neat foreshadowing of the overall palace plot that Denth turned into the villain, and we should have assumed that maybe that was foreshadowing for something in Siri's life as well. And I do like that essentially their motive behind it was self-preservation. It feels like a very believable motive.
Mm-hmm. I have to agree on pretty much all accounts, other than like I know a lot was going on, but the way that this seemed to be decades in the making, that's how like subterfuge tends to work. Is it's not like things will come to a head all at once, but it is built off of 100 different small wins. Honestly, the Blue Fingers, I should have guessed that as well, because like you said, there are parallels throughout the story that of things happening to Siri that happened to Vivenna, and they're sometimes parallel in how perpendicular they are, but you know, like it's a major event, but the opposite happens to one or the other. But there, you know, when something's happening to one, something is kind of happening to the other as they go along, and they kind of inform each other. So I thought it was interesting that you brought that up as well. I definitely fell for the hook. I thought that Blush Weaver was the main one behind everything.
Yeah.
She seemed a pretty prototypical, ambitious, like power for the sake of power, or anything for the sake of power type of villain. And she was a good one. She, for many of the same reasons that Denth was, except she was a lot less subtle. Hint, hint. And
See,
you know, I really love Sanderson coming back around and bringing up Light Song's line about how the way to be most dangerous is to make yourself seem as normal as possible, you know, or as average as possible, and bringing that around, I thought was really cool.
I thought Blush Weaver's personality and description and choice of actions towards Lightsong were kind of supposed to be foreshadowing that the returned could shapeshift and took the form that they saw as their form. Mm-hmm. And we were supposed to infer from her spot on appearance parallel with actions that somebody else might be a returned that doesn't appear to be a returned, i.e. Vasher.
I didn't quite pick up on that thread as far as like being able to transform, at least not more than they do, into like their peak physical form. You know, where they
Oh,
probably have some like mental control over that. But like talking about like on the level that you are, that's a very interesting take, and I didn't see that, but I see it now. That like it's
yeah.
one of those like I didn't see it, but now that I do, I can't unsee it.
Yeah, it was a pretty quick moment, but Vasher transforms himself into the oversized form of a returned
hmm
when he talks to the king to say,
Yeah,
by the way, I'm a returned.
well, and maybe it was because I was kind of ever since Vasher had that conversation with Vivenna, where he basically reveals that he has this intricate, almost scientific knowledge of how breaths work. I just assumed he was one of those characters that just knows more and can do more, period. Uh, like, that's just his character. So I didn't ascribe his abilities to anybody else at all. Uh, Except maybe the God King, but the God King couldn't do a lot because, you know, no tongue.
Yeah.
But like aside from that, I just assumed he was the type of character like unless I saw somebody else do it, then it was a Vasher exclusive ability. But that did close my mind off to the idea that you brought up. So maybe it wasn't for the best that I made that assumption.
So Sanderson tackles a lot of big morality topics in this book. I wanted to bring those up before we ran out of time tonight. Specifically, with Vivenna, he broaches the topic of preconceived prejudice and pitying those who do not want your pity. How do you think those sort of sensitive topics played across in this book, and do you think Sanderson did a good job handling interactions around sensitive topics like that?
I'm glad you brought that up as well because it was something that I actually pondered quite a bit myself when I was reading this. Is I definitely fell for that preconceived notion early on that uh, the head priest was the big bad, or at least up there with Blushweaver, because like anybody who's like manipulating the lives of others to keep them down or keep them isolated, I immediately ascribe, oh, well, you must be power hungry because you are trying to control somebody else's life and control what power they wield. And it took that thing that I mentioned that Siri brings up is her realization that this guy is doing it for legitimate religious conviction, because I was just like, well, that couldn't possibly exist. So I thought Brandon Sanderson did a really good job of forcing us to face our own prejudices by bringing out a lot of preconceived notions in, I think, pretty much anybody who reads fantasy and science fiction, because there tends to be an anti-establishment, anti-religion, or at least anti-theocracy type of mindset that it can't exist without there being immense amounts of greed. It can't be without greed or insanity. And in this case, it's they're zealots for sure, but it's not. It is out of devotion, not out of greed or this sense of like a hunger for power. It's just pure devotion to their religion, uh, and I thought he did a good job of using Vivenna as a vehicle for exploring prejudice from a protagonist standpoint without making the protagonist into a villain.
Yeah, I really liked the use of Vivenna for exploring the prejudice that I forget what the country is called that live up in the mountain. But
well, she is Idrian, so
Idrian, yeah,
Idris is the country, and then Idrians are the people.
Yeah, I really liked how Vivenna was prejudiced against Halandrins for their use of breath, and also assumed falsely that the Idrians in Halandrin were being intentionally mistreated and needed to be saved. It was, I thought, a really well done thing that he had Vivenna speak out about her feelings about these things, and those around her were like, "No, you're wrong. Quit being a jerk. You need to listen to us and not just assume you know what's best." I thought it was well done. It felt uncomfortable when she made her assumptions about the people around her, and I think that's exactly how it should feel. So I thought it was cool.
Couldn't agree more. Like, it was deliberately uncomfortable, I think, is a really good way of putting it.
Yeah.
And I thought it was done again, I think it was a smart thing to have the protagonist be the ones to do it, because it's easy to challenge preconceived notions from, like, making a villain realize the error of their ways, but it's really hard to have a satisfying way of doing that from the protagonist's point of view without them, imploding as a protagonist,
Yeah.
Especially when you're challenging core values. That's not an easy thing to do. And for her, those were core values, core assumptions.
Yeah, definitely.
About the way the world works. And it was personal stuff, specifically, like personal and emotional, not like preconceived notions about how scientifically something works and, here's the theorem to prove you wrong. No, this was lives and people and emotions, which is a much trickier thing to navigate, and I thought he did a pretty good job of it. Some of it was a little ham-handed and childish, but, so is Vivenna sometimes, so... So, fits the character.
I think that was, definitely the intent behind her was...
All right. Well, unless we have another topic from the chat, why don't we move into our final thoughts?
Sure thing. Do you want to go first?
No, I was going to say go ahead, Adam.
Okay. My final thoughts of this book were I thoroughly enjoyed a book that had political intrigue, but also the magic you expect from a fantasy author like Brandon Sanderson. It was kind of cool to see his take on how palace politics would go about, and essentially the way that Brandon Sanderson made the characters fight without resorting to magic, but instead using political maneuvering. It was, in my opinion, a very captivating story, and I felt that characters went through exceptional growth, especially in the case of Lightsong and his eventual demise, his demise felt I should say, the grief brought on from his demise felt very earned and very real. I enjoyed this as a standalone, and enjoy going back to it from time to time. And I guess I wish that Sanderson wrote more one-offs and kind of took less of a weighty approach to his novels sometimes. And I feel like this was kind of in that direction compared to some of his hardier novels like Stormlight Archive. So for me, it was a would recommend, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Right. And VS Drake says that they like this book, but it felt like it was kind of a completionist book for the Cosmere, and they don't know if they'd recommend it to people who aren't the target audience. I'm assuming by completionist book you mean like it's kind of like a puzzle piece it's more to fill in pieces of the Cosmere than it is to create a world of its own. I about half agree with that. I think it did serve more of a Cosmere purpose than some of the other ones were. It wasn't incidental, it was intentional, but I don't think that was the only intent. But that's my personal opinion on that opinion. But VS Drake says that for them, it's not you have to read it, but they are also not angry that they did read it. Fair enough. As for me, this was pretty far from my favorite of Brandon Sanderson books, but it was still a really good book overall. It is much more a political intrigue, like you said, Adam. I think it didn't need to be as long as it was for being a political intrigue. I think Sanderson has a habit of putting in a lot of world building, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but for political intrigue, there's time that was spent building a world that didn't necessarily need to be built in order for the political intrigue to play out. If it is a standalone novel, that's a problem. That is a problem. If there's a follow-up where that serves a purpose, then not a problem at all. But for this particular one, it specifically the way it manifested for me was it started off a bit slow, but when it hit its stride, it hit a lot of very interesting notes. It's very different from what he does, and he created one of my favorite characters in the Cosmere, so I cannot possibly fault him for that in Light Song, because like you said, the payoff for his death, and the fact that that character died, and I am both devastated and absolutely okay with it, says a lot. It was the perfect ending for the character, and that takes a lot to do in writing, especially in a book this big with as many characters as there are. And even then, the cast for this one was not nearly as big as Brandon Sanderson usually makes it, which I think is a good thing. So ultimately, created one of my favorite characters. The political intrigue was interesting, but it is hard to get into, and there's a lot of stuff that doesn't pay off if you don't know about the Cosmere as a whole. So I am kind of on that note with V.S. Drake. This is not the first Brandon Sanderson book I would recommend to anybody, but if somebody read a Brandon Sanderson book and liked it, I would definitely recommend this to them. I think there's just too much that gets missed if this shouldn't be your introduction to Brandon Sanderson. That's all.
Yeah.
But to anybody who likes Brandon Sanderson, I would recommend it. So that's okay. So that's what you mean by target audience. I thought via Drake. I thought you meant just nerds in general or people who like fantasy. But oh yeah, anybody enjoying the Cosmere. If that's what you meant, then yeah, that's a good description of it. Would never recommend as a first Brandon Sanderson book, but I would recommend to anybody who likes one of his other books.
Yeah.
All right.
Call it a night.
Yeah, let's start wrapping up this episode then.
Okay. Next time for December 17th, we already know we're reading The Choice of Magic by Michael G. Manning. That was supposed to be tonight, but we had a skipped weekend.
Yeah,
so
sorry
we'll
about that.
2 weeks.
I was sick with the flu, and some other stuff came up for Alan, so we had to skip. Thank you for your patience and all that. But anyways, Go ahead and announce the books again.
Yeah, so December 17th, Choice of Magic, and January 28th, so kind of a long break for the holidays and stuff. We'll be reading Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by J.K. Rowling. I'm sure that's a book that we've all probably had some experience with, but it'll be fun to tear it to shreds online in front of people. So,
yeah, no spoilers on our thoughts on that one. Yeah, but it'll be interesting to revisit it and try and take maybe a more objective approach and less nostalgic.
Yes.
And see what we get to that. But going forward, we are officially going to be moving from the new year on to a one book a month format. So the next book will be sometime in February. Not necessarily exactly a month because February is a short month. But so it'll be one book a month. I think we, since Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone was our redemption arc book for this past year, or this year, it'll be the past year when we actually read it. But since that's the redemption book, I think for February we are going to go back to the old formula. So if you have any sort of recommendation, we are open to anything that would fit in the 800 section of your local library.
FYI, that's fiction.
Yeah, in case we haven't said it 100 times before, but yes, that'll be fiction. And going forward from there, we may, I think, set up monthly themes and give people ideally more of a chance to feed us their book suggestions, whether that be here on our socials or even in the comment section of the Discord. But I'll let Adam tell you exactly where you can send us your suggestions.
Yeah. So real quick too, if you miss seeing our faces, I'm sure VS Drake will play some video games between December 17th and the January 28th, and he'll probably stream those too. So you should subscribe to our channel, and then you'll know at a moment's notice when that happens. I watched him play some Crash Bandicoot the other day, and it was quite hilarious, and made me feel nostalgic for my own past video game escapades. So you guys should keep an eye out for future surprise streams of dads playing video games poorly. That's what he called it. Okay, it's not me saying it. Otherwise, if you'd like to know more about us, dmstable.com is the place to go. That has all the links to everything that I'm going to mention, as well as all the info about everything that we do. Our Etsy page is dmstable.com/Etsy. There we sell 3D printed nerd culture stuff. So go check that out. YouTube is where we post all of our videos. So check out YouTube for all of our content. If you'd like to reach out to us on our social media, we're at The DM's Table on Facebook and at DM's Table on Twitter. we'll continue to post updates about what we're up to on those two platforms. And if you'd like a more intimate conversation with us, I would suggest our Discord chat. The Discord chat, you can join that by hitting us up on our socials, and we'll get you the link forthright. Otherwise,
one last announcement. Just a reminder for those who are subscribed to our Patreon, we are releasing our Christmas special on Christmas to those who want to spend a little holiday time with us. And for the rest of you, we will be posting the Christmas special publicly on January. So we do have that content coming out for you, and also look forward to us going forward. Part of the reason we're pulling back on the 800s is so that we can produce other types of content like dads playing video games poorly and all sorts of other stuff. So if you have other ideas, also hit us up on our socials about that as well.
Yeah, so patreon.com/DMs table for our Patreon page. Please join us and give us money. Ha ha ha.
Give us money and tell us what to do.
Yes. Subscribe, and then that'll give you the ability to vote on what book we read next. And as always, you can give us suggestions at any time, Patreon or no. It's just the patrons from Patreon are the ones that get to vote.
Right. All right, and unless you have something else, I think that'll do it for tonight. So thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for coming tonight. It's good chat. Always love a Brando Sando book. So
we'll see you next book.
See you guys next book.